Hey, good afternoon, Bill here with Sportsman Outreach. I want to talk to you today about, so you want to go out and preach the gospel in the open air. And I want to talk to you about where to preach. Where to preach. That's the first message of a series of teachings about preaching the gospel in the open air. Hold on, I'm going to shift this up a little bit. There you go. So the first thing in all discussions here, when you're talking about preaching in the open air, there's a core topic involved, and that's people hearing the gospel. People hearing the gospel. Underlying all the conversations, all the discussions, all of the everything about it, you boil it all down to, as an evangelist, a preaching evangelist, you want people to hear, keyword, people to hear the gospel. As an evangelist, we're assuming there are unbelievers in the crowd of people in front of us passing by, and we want them to hear the cross of Christ, Jesus Christ crucified, so they will turn and believe it. That's central reality is what we're dealing with here. I know in these discussions, a lot of other topics come up, a lot of motivations, a lot of end times, theology, these things, and all that. But what matters at the base, at the core, at the foundation, at the cornerstone is people hearing of Jesus Christ crucified. As Paul said, I boast alone in the cross of Christ. And you got to keep this in mind, that all these discussions, and if people aren't hearing it, they're not hearing you, you're not doing it. It's not happening. And so the goal is for them to hear it. The goal is for you to preach it. And the goal is for you to keep preaching. And that's to preach Christ crucified to people in front of you. Now, in my case, our case at Sportsman Outreach, we're dealing in large crowds of people at big stadiums or in a downtown area where they're having a big fan event. There's a lot of people going by. That might not be your scenario. You might be on a college campus. I preach on campuses. But at the end of the day, the same phenomenon is at work. You want people to hear of Jesus Christ crucified. You want them to hear you call them to repent, believe it. You want them to hear you explain it, exposit, expound upon it. You want them to hear you say, I'm here to pray with you and so forth. But they've got to hear you. This is the key thing. You preaching, them hearing. That's the key. Remember that. Always remember that. Don't get distracted by side topics. Stay focused on the work at hand. And you preaching and them hearing, and that's the key. All roads lead to that. And as long as you're an open air preacher preaching evangelistically in the open air, this is the goal. People hear you preaching. You go and preach. People hear you preach. I can't say it enough because I've noticed over the years that when conversations come up, and if we listen to people talk about a multitude of topics on the internet, hey, Richard, how you doing? You always, what happens is people typically talk about the peripheral matters, things like, I'm going to make a circle here, things around the core issue. And you get caught up in this circular dialogue here and miss the core issue. What really is driving the whole conversation to start with. As I've thought about it, this is why I'm saying this today, that we want to remind ourselves, and I'm reminding you today, that the core issue here is you preaching, people hearing. The reason we exhort everyone to go out more often to preach is so people can hear the gospel more often. It's that simple. You get rewarded for your labors, sure. Do people need to hear the gospel multiple times? Sure, yes. But at the end of the day, you want to go and you want to preach it, and it's just that simple. And don't get distracted. Don't let anybody distract you from that task, because if you do, you can get overwhelmed and you can lose heart, you can lose focus, and that's a long discussion of itself. So what I'm advocating here, if you want to preach the gospel in open air, go preach it, and remember the core issue is you preaching Jesus Christ crucified, you preaching the cross of Christ, and people hearing it. That's where it all starts. So I've got a couple of points here. First, where to preach. If you're going to go out and preach, where do you preach? Where do you find the people? A good friend of mine said one time we started preaching full time, he goes, Bill, I don't know where to go. And I said, well, go where the people are. And so I didn't know where to go either, 25 years ago, but the Lord showed me. But where are the people? Where are the crowds of people at? That's a general answer, because what did I say? You want them to hear what you're saying, right? Go where they're at. So if you've never done this before, in all seriousness, I'm gonna give you some suggestions. But I think what's really helpful is to drive through your town and look around and see where people are at. If you live in a big city, I lived in Atlanta for 20 some odd years and preached for 20 years there. You know, driving through the city showed me where the foot traffic was and where I could stand and people could hear me. And that's kind of how uh, the whole sports fan ministry developed, because that's where the people were at. In Atlanta, they had a great setup. And actually in Atlanta as well, they had the Georgia World Congress Center, which is where they had conventions. And I would stand there by the Phillips Arena sidewalk and preach as they went in and out of the World Congress Center. I preached at the Phillips Arena, Hawks games, down at Marietta and Centennial Olympic Boulevard. I'd stand on that corner from McCormick and Schmick, because that was a huge, busy traffic area for Hawks games, hockey games, concerts in Centennial Park. You had Centennial Park, you had Woodruff Park. But I learned all this by being out and about and watching where people are at. My point is, find where the people are at and go to where the people are. I know it sounds simple. If you've never done it, go look. It's really helpful in your education of this process of going out and looking around and getting a visual and seeing where people are, learning to look around, learning to look at your environment, learning to see the circumstances. And because you might come to a busy intersection as an example, and another intersection is just one down, and it might actually be more advantageous to the other because it got wider sidewalks. See, and you know that by looking around. These things may sound sort of petty, but in the scheme of things, they're really important. So you want to find where people are at. You want to look at the sidewalks and see where you can stand and all those strategic things. So go where the people are at. Where do you preach? Where the people are. So now, what types of events do you go to? So what I'm going to list here is events that seem to be universal, at least in the Western world, that I went to in Atlanta. And because of, again, the universal nature of them, I'm sure they are in most large cities in the United States, and or perhaps easily accessible if you live in a smaller community. So where are the people? What types of events? Sporting events, concerts, business conventions, and festivals in the park. Basically, there's four things. Plus, I guess very few cities have enough foot traffic in their downtown area, but that's possible as well in certain places. Atlanta it was busy enough downtown on Peachtree to go down there, every day. It wasn't the ideal place. It was more ideal to catch people over by the old Georgia Dome by Centennial Park, but that was possible. So that would be a fifth spot. So sporting events, concerts, conventions, festivals in a downtown area, or an area where there's a lot of foot traffic in a business environment. Those are the five general places to figure out. So what would you do if you live in an area you've never preached before? You could get on Google and search, basketball arena, football stadium, public parks. What I used to do is, again, learning this the hard way, is I would search for, large events, Atlanta, Georgia, and found events in Atlanta over at Piedmont Park or in North Georgia or all around the city. And I had a pretty good idea of what was going on where. So look up public parks in your area, look up stadiums, arena. You want to look up where they have the Georgia World Congress Center. What do you call that? A convention center. Look up convention center and see where things are, so you can know where to drive when you start to drive to them, and look around for people as well. Now, some of these events are busy as well during certain times. So obviously, a big football stadium is not busy when there's no game, and public parks like Piedmont aren't busy when there's not a festival. Fair enough. You got to find out when the festival is, when the game is, and plan to go when that's going on. That's something you learn along the way once you find where the venues are. Now, when you get to a venue, where do you preach? Again, you want people to hear you. And so typically at most places, there's several, how would I say it? There's typically a couple of really good places where the crowd flow comes together. And what you want is like in Atlanta, again, use that as an example, is that down by McCormick and Schmick's, they had concerts at Phillips Arena, like I said, hockey games and basketball. So I'd stand down there, and you'd have a crowd coming this way on one side of Centennial Park, another crowd coming this way from, down by Woodruff Park, and people coming towards me. just parking and stuff down Marietta, and they would all converge in that corner. And that was a great corner to get at. It had really wide sidewalks. I could stand to the side, and tons of people passing by. That's called a crosswalk, a place where all these individual, you might call rivers or tributaries, come together to form a larger river, and you want to get right there. And hopefully I'll take my phone out once the game's cranked back up and show you what I'm talking about. But that's what you're looking for, a good crosswalk. At a stadium, for instance, or really concerts, what you want to stay away from is the front gate. You don't want to get right up close. They've got security. So you want to get away from there, find a good crosswalk where people are crossing, and that's the first thing to start to look for. So I'm giving some introductory suggestions here, of course. Look for a good crosswalk. So we talked about we want to find the people. We talked about 5 places where to 5 types of events, and then crosswalks at these events. Like at Piedmont Park in Atlanta, I believe it was, Piedmont that ran north and south on the west side. I believe it was 10th Street. I think that's what it was. It would come in from the side, and they had a big gate going into the park. There's multiple, I think there was 1, 2, 3, 4 ways to get into the park, apart from just walking into the park where there wasn't a gate. It didn't have a fence or anything. But there was one spot, what I'm talking about, that was really busy. And so you want to look for that spot. That's why you drive around it. Like if you find a festival in your area, drive around a little bit and see where the busy areas are. Find the best crosswalking area at the busy area and set up shop right there. See, it's kind of that simple. And then if other people come and join you, you can spread out to the other gates and then cover the whole event. That's another topic for later. But crosswalk, look for that busy crosswalk where you can get to the people, but stay out of the way from the business at hand. Stay away from the front gate where they're collecting money and stuff. And then lastly, on this, the public square. So, we have a legal right to be out. So I know there's a lot of bluster on the media about our Christians' rights to do certain things. But the Supreme Court of the United States has clearly secured our rights to be out in the public square, engaging in free speech. So what I'm saying here is all of these places you should be able to preach. There should be no impetus. I'm not saying a policeman won't interfere with it, but I'm saying that legally you should be able to go. So don't have a hesitation. Don't be afraid that you can't go and preach. What I encourage you to do, if you've never been with Sports Fan Outreach before, give me a call. We can talk about it. I can look at where you're going on Google Maps and probably get a pretty good feel for what's possible, where to stand, where you might get into trouble, and so forth. I'm more than happy to do that for you. But what I want you to know right now is open air preaching with your voice and distributing literature is completely legal in the United States Constitution. What is not always legal is amplification. If you use amplification, you get into the local city code, and they can regulate that. That is true. And so that varies from place to place. But free speech, using your voice, passing out literature is completely protected by the United States Constitution. Amplification is typically allowed, but what you have to be careful of in that situation is rolling in and just being so loud that you disrupt what's going on in front of you. No, those people, they're going to fight you on that. They're probably going to fight you unless you've had a Mardi Gras when it's just so noisy that no one cares. We can talk about that later. But I want you to know today that free speech, you have the right to do this. Preach with your voice. You can stand on a box and preach with a voice. Well, if you preach with your voice, I was just suggesting, I'm not saying that's part of free speech. Use your voice, pass out literature, and go get it. Those are 4 points today. Again, let's go back to the beginning to summarize. 1, the core point in all of this kind of work is you preaching so people can hear. We are trying to engage with unbelievers. As I told a sort of a new acquaintance online, I said, Sports Fan Outreach and Assist exists to help unbelievers with their faith. That is one way to see what's going on. I know that sort of takes a lot of the theological implications out, and I understand that completely. What I'm saying is when you boil it down, our purpose there is to help these unbelievers believe. And when you listen to Jesus in the scriptures, and John write, I do these things, I write these things so that what? You'll believe. See, we're going so people will believe. Faith comes by hearing, belief comes by hearing, and we're the messenger. we're bringing the message, right? So that's the core thing. Keep that always in mind. And then we talked about, where do you go? You go where the people are. This is a mission of people hearing the gospel. Third, 5 types of places: sporting events, concerts, conventions, festivals, and city parks, and in a downtown area if it's busy enough. And then lastly, it's legal to do this. It's legal to do this. So let me end by saying, look, I want you to contact me if you have any questions. I want to talk to you. I've been doing this 20 years full time, 25 total. I've been in every country in the Western world. I've probably stood before, probably 10 million people. I've looked them in the eye. It's a lot easier to do than you might think. So I've got some experience. God's given me a lot of experience, and I want to help you get out there. You know why? Because I want people to hear of the good news of Jesus Christ. And so I want to help you get out there and do it. So call me, 423-724-7500, 423-724-7500. Contact me. Let's talk about it. Thanks for tuning in.